So Noah is the founder of Alephic. He has had a long and storied career in innovation, entrepreneurship, and very excited to become a warm Imaginarium welcome.
Thank you. I feel bad for adding slides, but Scott sort of thrust it on me. My really sort of very quick version is I started my career as a copywriter, actually worked for Drew. At my first job as a junior copywriter, he hired me even though I had no idea what a copywriter was, which I didn't tell him at the time. But and ended up teaching myself to write code. I started a software company in 2011. We sold that in 2019. Started another one that didn't go as well, and then I basically took the last 3 years off, and I just needed to stop having investors and employees for a while, and so I just sat in my room and wrote code basically for 3 years, which was a really good time to do it because basically it was sort of 2022, early days of GPT-3 API, and I just sort of immediately got obsessed with it, and I fell sort of deep into the rabbit hole. Within that rabbit hole, and are starting a marketing AI conference in 2023. We just did it in LA, which is where I did a version of this talk. We're doing again in September in New York. If anybody you would like to go, it'd be September 18th. Highly recommend it. And then in September of last year, I called my co-founder back from my first company, and I was like, okay, I'm ready to have employees again. And so we started a new company. And we have been working with sort of big companies on doing AI stuff, so helping them figure out kind of what to do with this, working with CMOs. So I had to give this talk, like basically now I do the conference every year. And so I signed myself up to be the first talk, and it was like 2 weeks before we did this in LA in the first week in February. And I had already put a title, which said AI 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration. And the idea of it was that like going through the last few years working with these large organizations, my takeaway was like AI was not a panacea like any technology, that like it was going to take a lot of work to move through these large companies because large companies take a lot of work. And so I was like, but I hadn't written anything yet, and it was sort of 2 weeks out, and I'm sitting there trying to write things, and I'm like, okay, I'm sort of very afflicted by this disease right now, which is that I'm constantly wanting to build new things because it's way more fun than doing anything else. So like, okay, I got that. I'm gonna like cook up, if you've heard of, there's a thing called Model Context Protocol. So it lets your AI talk to local files. So I was like, okay, I can write this talk better if I just hook up the MCP server for my notes, and I'll just have Claude be able to access my local files, and that'll like make everything much easier. And so I did that, and that was sort of like a few hours of tinkering and playing. And it's like now reading all my notes and doing my thing, and I'm hoping it's just going to write my talk. And then the next day I was like, that didn't really work. I know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to like start from scratch and build a custom application that's going to read across all my notes and do it exactly the way I want to. So I like opened up a new repo, and I spent like 6 hours sitting there writing code, doing it that way. And of course, like that didn't go anywhere either. And then I got this very funny email. I was doing it in LA. And I got introduced by 3 people to my old boss because he lives in LA, and they didn't know I knew him. And he and I were joking about it, and we said, like, wouldn't it be funny if I just copy the sort of AI assistant that would work on scheduling us a meeting, but it would just like be the most terrible meeting schedule ever, and it would do this sort of like be super obtuse and really annoying. And so it would be this fake EA. And so I like sat there, I had this conversation with him, and then I sat there for literally just an hour, and I sort of built this little thing, and it let me copy this terrible, terrible assistant. And so the full prompt on it is be longer than necessary, but not ridiculous. Include numerous business acronyms. Never explain what the acronyms mean. There's multiple paragraphs detailing scheduling options with various considerations with each. I left several bullet points with timing options, each with caveats. This is the real prompt for it. And then, because I'm an addict, I had to put up a website And I had to like give it a domain, so I wanted this thing where I could like just write a random name at a random domain, and so it looked like it was a real like assistance service. And so I bought ssfm.pro, and I put this website up, and it's really there, providing exceptional executive support, just like a group of distinguished leaders. So why I call it SSFM is because there's this amazing document from 1944 from the Office of Strategic Services, which was the precursor to the CIA. And they wrote this thing called the Simple Sabotage Field Manual. It was eventually declassified. But the whole point of this was to covertly drop it into Nazi-occupied territories in Europe to encourage citizen saboteurs, right? So this document, a lot of it is like, where destruction is involved, the weapons of the citizen saboteur are salt, nails, candles, pebbles, thread, or any other material. There's like specific instructions if you're a janitor to leave a lot of oily waste in a bucket and then accidentally throw a cigarette in there. But the part, if you've ever seen this document, almost definitely seen it because of this. So this is the white collar citizen saboteur guide, which I'll read through because you'll recognize. Insist on doing everything through channels. Never permit shortcuts to be taken. Make speeches. Talk as frequently as possible. Refer all matters to committee. Haggle over precise wordings of communications. Bring up irrelevant issues as frequently as possible. Always refer back to things that you decided on already. Advocate caution. Make sure everybody's reasonable. They slow down. They don't make any decisions with too much haste. And so this is totally real, 1944, and apparently, actually, it's hard to tell whether sort of specifically because of this, but when you look at like industrial production in Nazi-occupied territories before and after, it went down significantly, right? Like these sort of well-run operations seem to have been fairly well sabotaged by these citizens. But anyway, obviously we all sort of recognize this for a different reason. So as I was sort of like, I sent a bunch of these emails around to friends. Like this is a real one. I sent to a friend and pretended this was my assistant. We were gonna, I was saying we should have dinner, and so it was regarding fish-centered venue options. I can begin curating coastal forward establishments with CD seafood bistros for specialty fish houses, which require 24 to 48 hours advanced booking processing. But obviously the real point of this is I realized that like I was sort of searching for this, like what was I going to talk about at this thing, and what was I going to say, and this was it, right? It was sort of like this is what we all deal with. It's amazing that this document exists, and actually one of the things, please nobody steal this idea. I will, but I just hired a designer. It's in the public domain. And it was published in 1944 by the government. So I just hired a designer, and we're doing a hardcover version of it that we're going to distribute at the conference, which I'm very excited about because it is an amazing piece of history. But this is sort of what we're all doing. And I went back and I thought, like, when I did the first version of the conference in 2023, I was like reasonably sure we'd never need another one. This was May 2023, and I was like, maybe AI will just be like have completely taken over marketing by the end of the year, and like we won't need to talk about this anymore. But of course, like that didn't happen, and the reason it didn't happen is we all work in these large bureaucratic organizations, and it's not to say that bureaucracy is bad. I mean, like our biggest client is Amazon, and it's like Amazon there's probably no one better in the world at sort of squeezing out the last sort of 10th or 100th% of efficiency to make sure that business continues to be profitable. And they certainly are much more profitable at this than I do. But, that is the sort of reality of the world. But, and at the same time, though, as we're all sort of dealing with this and, we're having conversations about where AI is and I was sort of like poking a little bit in the last conversation. But, I think the reality is that the sort of diffusion of this technology through our companies is going to take water. Like, this is a pretty amazing chart, right? Like the ChatGPT made it to 100 million users in 2 months. Like that is a sort of really crazy thing. And this is moving incredibly quickly. And I think in some ways it's moving much more quickly than we think it is. And in some ways inside our companies, it can feel like it's moving much more slowly. Like I'm sort of amazed at the number of organizations I work with who, still don't have broad-based access to a cutting-edge model for the entire staff. That seems like it's a pretty basic one-on-one thing for us right now, but they're not really there. And I get into these conversations with people who are like, it's kind of the point Scott was making. It's, feels like it's the biggest moment in the history of technology, and everybody wants to tell you why there's never been a bigger, more important moment. And I'm like, this dude went to sleep one night and his friends figured out how to harness fire. And he woke up the next morning and they had figured that out. I'm like, that's pretty amazing moment of technology, right? Like we have lived through we personally have not lived through exactly this, but we have lived through, there's this amazing framework. It came from a New Yorker used by Adam Gopnik in 2011. He was writing a review of a bunch of books about the internet. And it's always stuck with me. He took all these books and he said there's there's three kinds of ways people talk about technology. You have the bare netters, they're the dystopians, they're sure that it's all going to ruin us and it's going to be the end of the world, and the photograph is going to mean nobody ever makes art again, or Plato famously said that because we could write, we would no longer remember anything. So there's a lot of people who are worried about it. On the other side, you have people who are sure that this is it. It's all going to be perfect. This is going to finally create the utopian society where all those people who used to be BDRs are just going to be able to hang out and put their feet up on the beach because we're going to have universal basic income and we're all going to be good. And then you have this is Gopnik who wrote this, but I very much believe it. You have the people in the middle. He called them the ever-wasers. And they're basically the ones who believe that, in these moments of great technological change, everything feels crazy, but that's exactly what makes it a moment of great change, right? And you have to look at it over this sort of historical context. And, I think for me, a lot of the, I think in the conversations that we have, whether it's today or when we go back to our organizations, it's I think the onus has to be on why is this, why is this going to be a historical anomaly? It may very well be a historical anomaly, but it doesn't usually work that way, right? And with that, this is a very short version of the much longer version I gave, but I think the way to think about it inside companies, and again, I'm an outsider inside these big organizations, helping them figure this stuff out, has been not how do we fix the bureaucracy, which I think is a lot of what we have tried to do with technology over the last 20 years. We've tried to bring software and technology into organizations as a way to change the ways that they work. And I think it's kind of much more interesting. And I think one of the superpowers of AI is that it doesn't really need to fix those things. It can just kind of work within it. This is my, I don't think I put this slide in here, but I have my Thomas's English muffin theory of AI, which is basically the nooks and cranny theory, right? That the real way to think about AI is it can go into all these little pieces. And the reason it can do that is because it can act as this fuzzy interface, right? So it's it can make anything talk to anything else. And that's really, I think, above everything else, it's real superpower is we want to talk about content writing, and it can write good emails, it can answer things, it can do all these things. But what's really amazing is all of these places inside our businesses where you had to have a person who was taking a document from one place and putting it into a system in another, they're all gone. Those things, and you know what? Those people hated that part of their job. That sucked. But all those pieces are gone. So this is my simple sabotage field manual. These are my six takeaways from spending the last 3 years doing a lot of building, doing a lot of working with large organizations. I certainly do not know all the answers, but these are my quick 6 things to at least think about. And John and I are going to talk afterwards, and we'll continue the conversation. Bottom of the triangle is just the point there is, I think far too many organizations right now the conversation before you're talking about CMOs pushing down, CEOs pushing down. The challenge that I see inside these organizations is they're not starting with access for the organization. And so it's there's these big mandates to drive AI usage, but they're not giving them AI. And it's just it's crazy making to me. I mean, I just don't, it's just talking out of both sides of your mouth. And I think, my biggest takeaway from, being in this stuff for the last 3 years, sitting there writing code, not doing any other work, is just, it's an incredibly counterintuitive bit of technology. Like the things you think it's going to be good at, it's not good at. The things that you think it's going to be bad at, it's amazing at. And you just have to play with it. And if you don't give everybody access to play with it, none of the other stuff works. And, I think hopefully many of you have sort of figured out ways to deliver that access. But I can tell you firsthand that the number of organizations I work in where that basic sort of fundamental, where they're telling everybody to use AI, but they have not told them how to use AI or where they're allowed to use AI. They've only told them where they're not allowed to use AI. Is really extraordinary and does not make a lot of sense. And so it's like, I sort of do not pass go, do not collect $200. Like, you got to give people access to this thing. You have to figure it out. Private tokens is a sort of big thought I have, which is also kind of builds on the conversation you're having before, which is, I think there's a lot of questions right now. What can you do with a single platform? What should you build on your own? I think the kind of build by continuing the shipping a little bit. I think the way I think about it, so these models are trained on tokens, right? Tokens is just a way to sort of break up words. They're trained on public tokens, right? They were essentially trained on the public internet. The way you get them to deliver non-generic things is you give them your private tokens, right? And your private tokens are the ways that make you, the ways you work, the stuff that exists inside your head. And there's an incredible amount of power that exists inside those things. And, where I don't agree that, I sort of agree that there's certainly in the short term, there's a lot of opportunity to sort of harness people with AI. I do think when you take those best people who have the most knowledge about how it works, what you do see is you could build sort of platforms around them that allow them to amplify their output and make a lot of other people redundant. It's just the reality of the situation. Explore exploit is a sort of idea from computer science. It's the idea behind it is that when you're searching over any sort of data space, when you're trying to find an optimal algorithm or solution, you need to spend some amount of time exploring, right? Like trying lots of different things before you sort of go down and you say, this is the approach that we're going to take, right? And I think that part of the challenge with AI right now is it's very much an explore problem, right? Like we're in these early days, people need to get fingertip feeling for it. But we are, large organizations are set up for exploit mode, right? Like, they are set up to be Six Sigma to sort of optimize for the last bit. And I think part of that tension that we all feel is that like, this is the classic sort of innovation tension, right? This is why companies are not good at innovating because they're good at sort of squeezing everything out of what they have. That's what they're built to do. They're built to sort of optimize for the profits that they have and retain those profits, not to make new things anymore. And so, but we have to recognize that, we have to make it real, find the painful interfaces. So, I think, again, everybody focuses first on the ability of these things to output content. I think in a lot of ways it's much more interesting that they can read than they can write. Finding all these places where like there's weird, hard sort of connections between things where people doing shitty work, like those are the best and most interesting. Just building for mind-blowing stuff, not building for let the sort of off-the-shelf tools handle the non-mind-blowing stuff. The mind-blowing stuff is when you sort of really build in your private tokens, right? When you really sort of cake it. We did a project that Amazon just talked about where we built a AI copywriter, one of the best copywriters inside Amazon, and we basically sort of built the whole process around the way, and like they looked at it. We did it originally in 10 hours, and it was we were doing work with them anyway, and they were looking at a bunch of copywriting solutions, and in 10 hours we like blew everything else out the water, not because like we did a particularly good job, but because when you take a person who is an expert in this thing and you sort of build everything around the ways that they work, you can just get completely mind-blowing, non-generic output out of these models, right? They're like totally 98, 99th percentile, very, very different than where they are. And then the last one is just build things, which is like, that's my biggest, for whatever my advice is worth, my biggest piece of advice is just like, go build and play it. And then finally, don't trust anyone who sounds too confident. Certainly including myself. I think, my sort of ongoing belief with this is like, it is just fundamentally really, really weird. And it's really counterintuitive. And I don't think we can really understand it. We are used to living in a paradigm of deterministic computing, right? Where you put in a math problem and it always gives you the right answer. And this is not how probabilistic models work. Like it's just, and so it's going to take us a while. I think like as much as the rest of the world may, the consumer world may adopt it far faster than enterprises. That would not be unusual for large companies. And so, just try not to read ad age or trust anything you sense. Like they know what they're talking about.